I am unashamed. What about you?
Welcome back to Unashamed. Zach, you missed our overtime. To our audience, and I know there's a couple of days in between podcasts, but we record two, so we just finished our last overtime, and Jase literally went Star Trek on us. He took us where no one has gone before.
We were. I step out for a 15-minute phone call. So what did I miss?
I mean, we were going to talk about a leper, but somehow we wound up.
We were talking about Jesus touching the leper.
Yeah.
And
it all seemed normal.
The ramifications of that, and we talked about, during the pandemic and the social distancing and the laws for leprosy in that time were way more strict. The Pharisees had added all this, and I brought up a few facts that, they couldn't be within 6 feet of another human being.
Right. Or 150 feet, depending on the wind.
The Pharisees added an amendment. What if the wind's blowing? Well, it's 150 feet. So he's sitting around looking at the trees, seeing if he can go out and walk to the store or whatever. But that led to these laws that come up that sometimes, are more difficult. And then I'm not sure. Oh, we were talking about rest, the Sabbath. We got to the Sabbath and rest because we were talking about Jesus taking these rests and with praying, and not just to mention, he created the earth in 6 days, and then I made the point that on the seventh day he rested, not because he was tired. It was it was a reflection.
Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed.
Yeah.
So I made the point that the reason God designed us to sleep is because in my opinion, the life expectancy would be around 19 or 20 years old.
If you didn't have sleep.
You didn't have sleep because for one reason is you would just literally go till you drop. And number two, when you wake up, you have that reflection of what was I thinking? You make an adjustment to your lifestyle,
right? Yeah. Based
on you now cycle. Can reflect after you sleep. So I was telling my wife that, and she said, "Well, while we're sleeping, because we have 2 toddlers at our house right now," she said, "What I've always wanted was an extra arm." And
so then we got into the 3-armed woman.
I don't think we've ever read in any of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, although we read where he withdrew to lonely places and prayed, it could have added so that he could get his rest. But I don't have any texts that say Jesus ever needed any rest.
No, that's my point. Well, why was he doing it? But he was asleep. Remember, he was asleep on the boat. He was a human, so he slept.
He slept on the boat. Remember, he was asleep underneath.
But I don't know if he had to have it for the energy that's needed.
Oh, I think he did. I think
he did.
I think he got tired.
The longest time that a human being has gone without sleep is 11 days and 25 minutes.
That's the record.
You can't do it. You got to have it.
Yeah,
even Jesus, because he was human. He was fully human, so he would require sleep.
I'm pretty sure my grandma was right on the record. When she was going through her struggles mentally, because
she would go through a manic spell. She would not sleep for about a week.
Yeah, for days.
It was close.
But that's interesting, Jace, because even when I was a teenager, we'd stay up all night, a couple of nights in a row, just never sleeping. But then when I did go to sleep, I would get up and I did crazy things. Like one time I emptied all the leftovers into the sink, turned the water on, went back over and laid down. Mom comes in, there's just food floating in the sink. And she's like, what?
Well, that was before Jesus. And I told them, I said, you need to look into what he's doing to create these
in that case, Jase, that was not alcohol or drug-induced. That was no sleep. So somehow in my subconscious,
sleep deprivation.
Yeah, and I just got up and did crazy things. It happened several times.
You were channeling your inner granny there. That's what was going on. That's
it really was. That's exactly what it was.
So back to the
what about the
Star
third
Trek,
arm? You kind of
Missy. Well, Missy, she's having back problems, and I came in and she's on a back. I don't know what it was. It was making a noise, and her legs were up, but it was like somehow or another stretching your back out.
Yeah.
And she's like, I don't know why my back's been hurting. Well, I looked over at our 30-pound toddler and said,
I know.
pretty sure it's from hauling little mares around on your 100-pound frame.
Yeah.
But and that's when she said, I just need an extra arm. I wish I had 3 arms. And so I was like, you know what? That's a pretty good idea. But then we got into, well, where would you put it?
Where would the arm go?
Because I was like, it's not like he couldn't have done it for moms. Because I made the point that another reason that I believe God created us to sleep was because of moms. I mean, that's the only, if they didn't have that, because I just watch them. I mean, I'm watching what my wife does. And now, I mean, as a grandma, I mean, that sleep is the most precious time because they get a break. I mean, it's full time. It's a full-time job keeping up with these.
Gotta have it.
It's. I was like, he did it for that process too. But she's like, yeah, but if I just had an extra arm, I could do more stuff.
Where were you gonna put it?
Well, we couldn't figure it out.
Well, we didn't figure it out, but it led to quite the discussion.
I said
I'd have the base of the arm attached around the sternum area, right in the center,
right in the middle.
Well, I thought that,
yeah.
but that's weird.
Just seems awkward.
Yeah, I just thought you should have 2 more.
Once you,
I think two sets. That's what I said.
Yeah, and
we're gonna add arms.
Break into more than, but if you break into more than 2 arms, that you're already in the weird zone. So that you can't use that as a factor because it's already weird. Right? Well, it's all about efficiency at that point.
And I was like, who would ever be with a third arm woman? But one of our crew here said, if all women had them, you wouldn't even think anything about it, and which is probably true.
That's true.
I do think it would help with the little ones.
Yeah. The sets, though, I think you just have 2 more coming out the side right below the other 2. But then you got 4 shoulders. Think about all the more potential injuries. Your shoulders, your elbows. I mean,
that's true. I mean, I don't know what we'd do because you have right-handed, left-handed. There's a pitcher now in college.
It would be right 1, right 2.
That has a glove that fits both of his hands. I think he's at Mississippi State. And so when a right-handed batter comes up, he throws right-handed. When a left-handed batter comes up, he puts his glove and throws left-handed.
Oh, he can pitch with either arm.
That's a unique talent.
I've seen him bat.
Not that he can do it, but he does it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Boy, what do they call it? Ambidextrous.
Ambidextrous.
Yeah,
to the max.
But I mean, he's throwing, and I'll watch the game for that reason, and he's equally as effective. I mean, it's not like
one's not better than the other.
Yeah,
because when hitters bat, one will usually be better left-handed than he is right-handed, or vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, you have switch hitters, but a switch pitcher. I thought, boy, if that guy gets that locked in,
oh man, that's valuable.
He's gonna make some money. But how do you start that? Some dad said, "Hey, let me tell you, we're gonna change the world of baseball."
He probably just showed up.
I don't know whether y'all did it or not, but we're right hand, right arm. I'm right arm, but I batted left-handed.
Yeah.
My left eye is my dominant eye, and I'm right-handed, so I shoot left-handed.
Me too.
Yeah,
but I'm right-handed.
Yep.
Do you shoot left-handed?
There was a guy. I do. I switched recently.
Do you? Oh well, if you switched recently, then you probably are still in the struggle bus.
Well, it's just a lot harder to shoot when you're left.
Yeah.
I was going to retrain my eye. I heard you could put a patch on it, but then I was like, man, that's going to take forever. And you got to walk around with a patch.
And then people think you're a pirate. Yeah.
I think it'd be a good look for you, Zach.
Yeah. You could pull the pirate off.
And then people would say, what happened to your eye? And you're like, no, I'm just doing this for therapy.
Yeah. There is a solution, though. I just looked this up. MIT Technology Review posted an article in 2018. A guy developed a system where you could have 4 arms. You have your 2. It's a backpack you put on, and then there's 2 robotic arms that come out.
Would you send that to my wife? Send that to my wife.
Yeah,
because she'll know that the only way you're sending that text is if I revealed her deep.
Send it to her now, and that way, if we get a response, we can talk about it on the podcast.
Well, she asked about being on the podcast because she wants to promote our July Independence Day celebration.
Yeah.
So we'll have her on, and maybe we can get some more insight on her idea of the extra arm.
So I want to mention that, Jay, since you brought it up. It's called the Faith Family Freedom Celebration. It's going to be July 2nd. It's going to start at 4 o'clock. It's at your Logtown estate that you guys have. That's a bed and breakfast. Really cool property. There's going to be food trucks, ice cream, inflatables, games, and then there's going to be people sharing Jesus all day. They even have places set up where you can be baptized if you want to. So that's a Sunday before the 4th of July. So you can come to WFR if you want to that day. Dad will be teaching his class, and then come on out to the Logtown estate. So that's an invitation for Unashamed Nation. She said, just come on. We're going to have a big celebration that day. So July 2nd at 4 o'clock at the Logtown estate.
And we'll let you know.
Yeah, we're going to have her on to push it, but I did want to mention that today because she sent me that text this morning.
Okay. So before we start, we're in Luke 5, but I had a crazy dream last night I wanted to share with you. So I got a new movie idea for you. Now, it came...
Well, Zach is now a movie mogul. So
What is a mogul?
I don't know.
It's a very, very powerful person.
Very powerful person in movies.
Yeah.
Are we sure about that?
No, we're not sure about that at all.
No, are we sure he's powerful, or are we sure what a mogul is?
Yeah, I don't know.
All right, here's what a mogul is.
For that.
Here's what a mogul is. It is an important or powerful person, especially in the motion picture or media industry.
I mean, to be honest, the first time I heard it, which wasn't today, I felt like that was something that I might need to be removed.
Yeah.
Well, how long have you had that mogul? We need to.
It was like that expository.
Well, I knew that was a joke. I knew it was a cousin of suppository, but he used it in a biblical context, and I just didn't like how it sounded. Because
he said we approached the text expositorily. That's what
Zach said that in an interview, and I was like, for the 14 people who knew what that meant, awesome. But for the rest of us, I felt like we were doing an injustice. So can I tell you my dream or not?
Yeah.
Do you want to hear it? I don't care if you... look, it's a dream. So, but I had a dream because I was studying. When I got to this Luke 6, I'm going to tell you, this Luke 6 as a preview.
I know you came in talking about it. I said, Jace, we're in Luke 5. We're not going to get to Luke 6 for a minute.
I was reading ahead, and my mind was blown, and I was wondering how I missed this before. But in Luke 6:17 through 26, we have a blessings and woes segment via Jesus. And it's like the Sermon on the Mount, and people call it the Sermon on the Plain because it says he came down from the mountain.
Flat spot. Yep.
So all these scholars are up in arms, like, what does it mean? And so it spawned a dream from me because I studied it for 3 or 4 hours, then went to bed, and I woke up and I thought, because you know how you remember your dreams sometimes? So I watched a movie in my dream about Luke. Has there ever been a movie about Luke?
The book of Luke?
No, not the book of Luke.
Oh, Luke the person.
Yeah.
Well, he was featured in the movie about the Apostle Paul that we've talked about before on here.
Was he?
Yeah, Jim Caviezel plays him.
Plays Luke?
Plays Luke in that movie. What
did he do?
He's just interviewing Paul to write Luke and to write Acts.
But the movie was about Paul.
The movie was about Paul.
All right, well, I'm saying what you just said there, that's what the movie was. So what happened?
Maybe you just saw that movie.
No, I have never seen it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
maybe you got up and watched the movie like Al would go dump stuff in the sink. Maybe you had a moment.
That's right. Maybe you had a moment where you
sleeping. You got up. You put. See,
that's what a movie mogul does.
Scorsese, I'm trying to give you the movie. It's here. So,
all right, hang on. Before you do that, let's take a break. So we're all gun owners and have been for our entire lives. So we know, Jace, that one of the most important things about being a gun owner is you need to have a clean weapon.
You must clean the weapon. Just being responsible.
Being responsible helps with accuracy. It's the safe thing to do. Of course, most of the times it's a messy procedure, but some of our friends at Barrel Buddy have come up with a polymer that works really well. They have one that fits every size gun, pistol, rifle, shotguns. Basically, what they do is they make sure to clean the rifle grooves as well as everything else. It's a 3D cylinder, which is what your barrel needs. They have these white polymers, so you can tell exactly what comes out of your gun. It scrubs and collects particles, absorbs any remaining residue, and buffs the interior surface clean. So, great process. These guys, like us, started a small business because they saw a need out in the field, which is what we did. They're also a great Christian company. I get devotionals from them all the time, which we love them for that as well. So clean your gun is important to be a responsible gun owner. Doesn't have to be messy when you have Barrel Buddy on your side. So go to barrelbuddy.com, BARREL Buddy, barrelbuddy.com, and check them out.
Here's where the movie, so it opened up, there was a trial going on, and I guess I was trying to wrap my head around who was on trial, and it was Paul and some of the other members of Jesus's followers, because they all were martyred, I guess. So, now, I'm giving some of this because I had to process what I just
Dreamed?
Yeah, dream. So I'm giving you the movie idea. So that was where it opened. And Luke, even though he was a doctor, because we get that from Colossians 4.
He was a physician.
He was a physician, which is why there's I think so many references in here about Jesus healing diseases,
illnesses,
illness. That we're in the leprosy section. So I mean, this is actually going to fit with where we are.
And he actually is the only one that mentions Jesus sweat the drops of blood, which is a medical condition.
Sweat the drops of blood. But now think about it he's a physician, so he's in the medical profession.
Yep.
And his book in Luke ends with Jesus dying and coming back to life.
Yep.
Well, in the medical profession, where's that at?
That doesn't happen.
So this is my dream, because I'm already getting off the subject. So he's representing. He's like the medical. What do they call him? The expert medical. You can't have a trial without a medical
expert witness.
Yeah, when there's some kind of murder or a dead body. Well, Jesus. So he starts an investigation. Now my dream went backwards because he's up and he's saying that this Jesus was a supernatural being, and they're not going to deny him. So the men, he's representing the men because they're on trial, because they won't quit preaching that Jesus is the Son of God. Yeah. And here's this doctor as the medical expert, and he starts telling the story. And so my dream went backwards all the way to Luke 1, where he says, where we started when he says, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled, just as they were handed down to us by those who were the first eyewitnesses and servants of the word. Therefore, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning. So he had done an investigation. So think Sherlock Holmes. That's how the movie went. But he went backwards because he was telling them, he was relaying them. He's like, I went to the tomb, and I saw him at the tomb. But he's trying to figure out where's the body.
Who was playing Luke in your movie?
It just was a bearded guy that looked like guys from The Chosen.
Okay.
So I guess
it may have been one of the guys.
The Chosen. You know what? It looked like those two guys.
That's what it was. Yeah. The guys that play James and John were at that thing with us the other night. That also planted into your head.
But he was saying this with power because he was investigating and he was interviewing people. And he was like, and he had his notebooks, and it was a very thorough investigation. So every time he would backtrack, and the leper came up, the people, and he was like getting the information, and none of this made sense in the medical world, but he had such an overwhelming amount of evidence of eyewitnesses that it was like you were believing it. And so, of course, then after his closing remarks, they were like, no, guilty. Because he literally had no proof besides eyewitness testimony.
So I got it, Zach. NCIS Jerusalem.
I think it would make a great movie.
Here's your show or your movie.
You see what I mean? He investigates.
That's
He's
what
a medical,
NCIS is.
Yeah, he's a medical professional, Sherlock Holmes. He goes through all the evidence. He goes to all the places. He interviews all the people, all the healings, all the crazy things that happen supernaturally, like the feeding of the 5,000. But he's giving you the scientific, medical view of this. And in the end, it was overwhelming that this person was the Son of God. But since they could not interview him, because then he had all the reports about the sightings of him post-resurrection. But they're like, well, where's he at? And so then he's looking for him, trying to get him to testify. But he couldn't find him, obviously, because you couldn't recognize him. He was shape-shifting also.
Right.
And, of course, he had then ascended to heaven, and they're like, oh, yeah, okay, how convenient. So anyway, I thought that'd be a good movie.
You know what? I mean, look, we've got a TV show that was born out of this podcast. We've got a movie that was born out of this podcast. This might be the next. This might be the next thing, Jace.
I mean, look, it's still in the dream state.
Still in the dream state.
So you have to take that and see what's doable in the movie. But if you're a movie mogul, that should be no problem, because there's never been a movie about Luke.
No,
I'm more of a disruptor. I don't know if I'm
well, that's disrupting, because he wasn't one of the 12 apostles.
Yeah.
He was just a doctor who did an investigation, and I think...
Who's the famous doctor that does, every time you see something happen now, he's always the one that comes in and does the autopsy?
Dr. Oz?
No, not him. That Palin?
Dr. Phil?
No, this guy. He's like famous. He's not one of these guys that always comes in. Every big case, Epstein, all of them, they talked to Michael, some of them, I don't know. But anyway, it's like that guy would be, but it'd be like in first century. I think you got something here, Jason.
Well, who doesn't like those? You have a trial.
Yeah.
You have the evidence. You're doing an investigation. Who doesn't like?
There's like 10 NCISs on right now.
Everybody watches this stuff. They want to see the investigation. I mean, you have the best script ever written right here. Mm-hmm. And you have a guy, which, look, we haven't talked about a lot. Luke, he if you go by percentage-wise, and if you count the New Testament starting at Matthew, he wrote more of the New Testament than any other writer.
That's right.
I think it's like 27%.
And he didn't personally witness any of it. He got it all from his investigation.
He investigated.
That's exactly what it was.
It was an investigation. What we're studying here is an investigation. Now, he was in the time period.
Yep.
But he wasn't walking around as one of the followers.
No.
So why don't we do a movie about his investigation?
Yep. I like it. That make that happen.
The goal that Luke presents about Jesus, the goal of it all is, do you believe?
Yeah.
Do you believe?
Do you believe?
He was trying to convince a man named Theophilus
Exactly.
that this was true, because he even had an audience in mind. Like,
you're sure of what you hope for. You're certain of what you can't see. Is there enough proof here for you to say, you know what? It could have happened.
No, that's good.
So I think it's a good lead-in, though, to why he's doing the stories that he's doing. So he tells, obviously, the common miracle about how this got started with the making them fishers of men.
Yep.
Despite Peter realizing that this is the Son of God, saying, go away from me, I'm a sinful man. So then you're brought to the leper.
Who has the exact opposite of Peter. He comes to him and says, Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean, which is interesting. He recognizes his greatness, but he comes to him as an outcast, as one who knows that he really shouldn't come to him, but he does anyway. And so there's something
and the
about
law,
that.
and the law.
His thinking was, this Jesus of Nazareth here,
He can do this.
he's the only thing that can do this.
He can do this.
He had it down to he's the only one.
Yeah.
When you get to it, the only one that can remove your sin, he's doing these things.
Yeah.
Get a look at him. And then you make up your mind whether he had the You're talking about a dream. This is quite the dream here if none of this is true.
That's right.
How in the world you come up concoct this story?
Plus, don't you love Jesus' response? I am willing. In other words, he says, if you're willing, you could do it. And he says, oh, I'm willing.
Which flies in the face of every other religious group. This guy was outcasted not from just the world, but from the religious group. He was not allowed to go anywhere near a temple.
Right. And we also know, Jace, that he doesn't have to touch him to heal him. There's many miracles that occur where he just says, yeah, she's good.
And Jesus doesn't burn down the whole law system. He tells him, don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for you for your cleansing as a testimony to them. So he's saying, because
that was a requirement that you had to go and show yourself that now you didn't have the disease.
Well, and that's what I was saying. The spirit of the law was good. I mean, they were trying to keep humanity from all becoming infected with various diseases. Right. That's why the law was written. So here he comes and flips that on its head, touches this man, heals him, because now you see something better than the law that has appeared. We have a power here that Jesus is distributing to a person who's infected, and he cleansed him.
Someone once said, it would take more than a Jesus to invent a Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, he couldn't have had this much material unless he was Jesus.
Well, and to Jace's point about the investigation, it also shows that someone who understood this from a scientific point of view recognized it for what it was.
Yeah.
In the supernatural, which is pretty amazing. Let's take another break.
Well, and as a doctor, you would encourage putting your hands on an undiagnosed diseased person.
That's right.
Especially when your law says don't do that and your society says don't do that. But Jesus had just said, I'm going to make you fishers of men, and the type of guy that he's fishing for was probably causing some discomfort among the disciples. They're like, wait, what?
They probably, They're like, think about it. That's a good point, because the first story after that is this. And I mean, just that line there that, Lord, if you will, make me clean. And Jesus, this part here, stretched out his hand and touched him. I mean, you think about like a God who touches the untouchables. I mean, the Spirit of Christ, the love of Christ that's in him. And I think there's something here. I was reading Matthew Henry's commentary on it, and he talked about spiritual leprosy, and he had 6 responses to how that we have spiritual leprosy, and how we should respond to Jesus based on this passage. And the 6 things were: number one, seek Jesus, which is what this gentleman here did. 2, humble yourself before him. 3, earnestly desire to be clean, because that's a big thing too. Do you even want to be clean? I think that's part of the problem with sin sometimes in spiritual leprosy is we don't even want to be clean, but earnestly desire to be clean. 4, firmly believe Christ's ability and his sufficiency to clean us or to cleanse us. 5, be in prayer for pardoning mercy and renewing grace. And then 6, refer ourselves to the goodwill of Christ. And that's what this guy did. And so I think there's a lesson even in how we can respond to Christ. You know, we see his nature here, that he touches the untouchable. Then we think about ourselves and we respond like Peter responded. In part, we say, I'm a sinner, but we don't say, get away from me. We ask God, if you're willing, would you touch me and cleanse me? And if we come to Christ in that way, I mean, he's faithful and he will do it. And just that promise alone should get everybody who's listening to this podcast, that should give us a transcendent, amazing hope that we don't have to sit in our spiritual leprosy.
That's true, but it's also true that you may never get your miracle if you do have, a disease. I mean, we're going to the next story about healing a paralytic, and my point is that is more weighty than what happens to us physically. I mean,
which is where he goes next. Before we go there, 2 things I want to mention. about this leprosy before we leave it. One is another medical thought is, your skin is the largest organ in your body. It's considered an organ, your skin, because it's
or own your body,
or you could say own, but it's the largest organ. So when you think about vital organs, if you ask somebody what's the largest organ, they'd probably say the liver. They'd be thinking internal, but your actually external skin is considered an organ, which shows you the vitality of it, I think, from a medical side. But I wanted to mention this in Luke 17, if you jump ahead, because there's another healing. And it's interesting because in that case, he doesn't touch them. It says they stood, there's 10 of them. So they're kind of a little colony of lepers. And they stood at a distance, and he's right on the border of Samaria, and they call out, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw him, he said, "Go show yourself to the priest." And see, in that case, he doesn't touch them. He just says, "Go." And as they went, they were cleansed, which is interesting, different kind of way of miracle. But look what happens. One of them, when he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. And of course, then Jesus makes the point, we're not all 10 cleansed. Only this foreigner comes back, and he says, "Rise, your faith has made you well." So I thought it was interesting because in that case, it was a double untouchable, because not only was he a leper, but he was a Samaritan leper, and yet he had the gratitude to come back and to throw himself at Jesus' feet.
Where are the other 9?
Yeah, where's the...
Well, to your point, internet search that I do not recommend you do, but because you'll just be sad, that I did, I did the search, and the phrase was eternal skincare. And what I didn't find was any kind of picture or reference to Jesus. But there are hundreds of jars, bottles.
Oh, here we go with your.
Well, I'm making a point here.
I know.
Now look, you get buy $49.99 worth of this cream.
Eternal skincare.
Eternal skincare. And what I'm saying is Jesus may not heal your skin condition, but I know right here, he has the power to do that. So that gives me some comfort and peace whether I receive that or not. When you're in Jesus, you do have the hope and fact that that's not going to be a problem.
Right.
And going back to this Luke investigation, at the end of the story, he come back from the dead. So no matter what happens, and this leper, he died at some point.
That's right.
So he encountered a greater problem than his leprosy.
Yeah.
Because he quit living. And so what I'm saying is Jesus is offering not necessarily a miracle, but he's offering hope to humanity that no matter what happens, because he's really going to address this in Luke 6, it's kind of an upside-down kingdom. You're not going to be controlled by this fear of things that happen to your body and death, because you know in your mind that Jesus is an eternal being. You're going to be fine.
Right.
So we shouldn't respond to these discomforts and challenges as ordinary people. And that's where I was going with this paralytic. I mean, one of the most Jesus-preaching people I know is a guy in a wheelchair.
Yep.
And we had him on the podcast before. Or I think I discussed his book.
Yeah, we talked about it.
Yeah. And so I'm like, well, you're like, well, why doesn't God just heal him? When you ask him, he's like, well, I'm perfectly fine because he knows that he's going to be resurrected. He's going to be made whole. And he's like, God works in our weakness, which I think is the point of this.
I agree. Mm-hmm. Which to Zach's point about the idea that there's a spiritual component even to the leper. But you're right. Luke's going to take that and then show us that in the next story, because it's the next untouchable. You're going to see that flipped upside down. Let's take another break. So let me read it, and then we'll get into it. So he comes right off of that with the healing of the leper. One day as he was teaching, Pharisees and teachers of the law who had come from every village of Galilee and from Judea and Jerusalem. So just as a little bit of a geographical idea, remember he's up in Galilee, up in the hometown area, but now they're coming from down south, or really it's up, but they're coming from south down in Jerusalem, Judea, they've heard. So now we're starting to, the word's starting to spread. So they're sitting there, and the power of the Lord was present for him to heal the sick, which is an interesting statement. Some men carrying a paralytic on a mat came carrying a paralytic on a mat and tried to take him into the house to lay him before Jesus. So he can't get there on his own. But he's got 4 friends that are carrying him.
And before you keep reading, you see this. What makes this powerful is Luke is a doctor.
That's right.
And he's seeing Jesus heal all these diseases, heal a leper. He's telling the story. I just think it's I think it'd make a great movie.
I do too. I think
saying.
you're right. When they could not find a way to do this because of the crowd, they can't get in there. It's just too many people. They went up on the roof, and it doesn't say it, but they tore a hole in the roof. I mean, it's the only way you could.
Well, it says it in Matthew's account or whatever.
So think about whose house that was. I'm sure somebody was a happy wife there. And
a lot of people think it's Peter's house.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
I saw that, but I wasn't sure whether
because he's in the region and he spent time there. They lowered him on his mat through the tiles into the middle of the crowd, right in front of Jesus. So they literally tore a hole in the roof to get this guy down to Jesus. When Jesus saw their faith, which is interesting, he said to the guy on the mat, "Friend, your sins are forgiven." So,
which was a record scratch.
Ring.
I mean, that made no sense
At all.
We know how the story ends, but in that moment,
if you could just stop there for a second, have the pause. That's right. Wait a beat, because everybody went, "What do you say?"
Well, the guy, I guarantee you, the guy on the mat, he didn't like that. And you think, what? Oh no, he thought, oh, how sweet. He that's not what he came for.
Nope. That's why the friends brought him.
Come on, sins are forgiven. What?
Right.
I mean, because the concept of Jesus, for number one, it would be like, I don't believe you. Who are you to forgive somebody's sins?
Right.
Because I think practically, so where's 4 of us here. I mean, let's say I reach over and pop you,
Like that wasp did that time.
Yeah, just in a fit of rage. And Phil says, I forgive you. You're like, what's it got to do with you? You see what I mean?
Yeah.
You're like, the only person who could do that would be somebody representing themselves as God.
Right.
And to me, I wouldn't, if you said that, it wouldn't even register with me. And you wouldn't care either.
Right.
It has nothing to do. I mean, they're coming because they had a rumor that this guy can heal you.
Yep.
When is the walking going to start? I mean,
And I personally think, before I read the rest of it, that Luke includes that little tidbit about those teachers of the law and the Pharisees that had come from down at the Mecca is why Jesus does this. I mean, that's just my theory. But anyway, So 21, the Pharisees and teachers of the law, here they go. They begin to think to themselves, and they're not saying it, they're just thinking it, which we all did too. Who is this fellow who speaks blasphemy? Who can forgive sins but God alone? And here's where you get into, with Jesus, you got to watch it because he does the Jedi mind trick. Jesus knew what they were thinking and asked, why are you thinking these things in your hearts? Can you imagine what they thought when he said that? He's looking at him, he says, why are you thinking about this?
yeah, they're probably looking around.
They're not looking around like, how's he know?
See if they're bugged or something.
Which is easier to say, your sins are forgiven, or to say, get up and walk? But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, he said, and then he looks down at the paralyzed man, I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home. Immediately he stood up in front of them, took what he had been lying on, and went home praising God. And he was skipping and dancing on the way. Everyone was amazed and gave praise to God. They were filled with awe and said, we have seen remarkable things today.
It's a wow moment because it's really the physical and the spiritual being prioritized.
Yeah.
I want you to pontificate a little bit on 26 there. We went from to everyone was amazed and gave praise to God. Well, is that the naysayers too?
I think so.
I think in the moment.
I think in the moment, yes.
In the moment, they didn't like it.
Yeah. He can't. Who can forgive sin? Only God can forgive sins. He said, "Look, which is easier for me to say?
That's right.
Raise a man that can't walk, get him up. You think that
But
just
Phil,
happen?
it's like a guy comes out and says, "Hey, I'm fixed to." He's in a baseball game. He says, "Look, I'm fixed to hit this ball, not out over the fence. I'm gonna hit it out of the stadium." And look, okay, yeah, who are you? Yeah, what? Well, then he does it. Well, in that moment, as it's leaving the stadium, even the naysayers are saying, "I'll tell you one thing, that guy."
Well, no, let's take our last break. That actually happened. They still talk about it. Now it's been almost 100 years later when Babe Ruth was in Chicago and pointed his bat up, and then he hits one right where he pointed it. I mean, they're still talking about that 100 years ago. Babe Ruth did that. So to your point,
I think about what this line here though, or when they're questioning him, and they say, "Yeah, who has the authority to do this?" Jesus knows what they're thinking. Ask the rhetorical question. But I love this line because when we talk about miracles all the time, we talk about it a lot on this podcast. But the verse 24 is powerful. But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. So you say, why did he perform the miracle? That you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. He said to the man who is paralyzed, "I say to you, rise, pick up your bed, and go home." I think we so often and I think here they when they were amazed, they were focused on that miracle, but they missed the reason for it. And so I always said,
he's making sure that the reason he's there to begin with. I came here to remove the sins of the world. Take a look at that guy. He's on a mat. I'm going to tell him to get up. Y'all know he's sick. You know he can't move. I'm going to show you. I'm showing you that the one who has come down, when you finally get to the point to where you believe that I died for you, was resurrected for you, it's true. The gospel is seed planted in all these events that happen to people. Like, good night. How in the world did he do that? He's trying to show them.
So good.
I'm the only one that can remove your sin. I'm trying to show you that.
But if the guy would have missed the point,
that comes out later as he goes.
The guy would have missed the point that he could have his sins forgiven. What he doesn't realize is, even though he was healed and it was awesome, well, if he never makes the connection to the real coming of Jesus, that he is going to die and forgive your sins.
The groundwork.
Well, he missed it. It'd have been better off for him not to be able to walk.
That's right.
Yeah, and that was Zach's point, which I think is true. I think the idea here is they really missed. They were amazed at him being able to get up and run out of there.
See, they
should have been amazed that his sins were forgiven. That was much more important.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why we even see it in our world today. People are chasing the miracle instead of the miracle worker.
Correct.
Well, what are you doing? I mean, you have a clear story here, what is Jesus? I think somebody should say bumper sticker style. What is his point here?
His point is, when you get by the time you get to chapter 9, they set out who is he? He replied, some say you're John the Baptist, some say Elijah, still others. They're still trying to figure out who he is. But chapter 9 is the first time that he spells it out. I'm going up to Jerusalem, I'm going to die, be buried, and I'm going to be raised from the dead. He's leading them into that.
He's basically saying, even though I'm a man, there is a God, and you're looking at him.
That's it.
Or I wouldn't be able to do this.
That's right.
Only God could heal, and I think Luke, as a doctor, is one of the reasons that he wrote these books, is because he was convicted.
If he just come down and not said too much, just came down and they dragged him off and killed him, he's kind of laying the groundwork so that when he finally gets to his death and his resurrection, you can reel back all the things that he did And it's like y'all said earlier, you end up by saying he had to have been God.
Well, that's what this guy is saying. Jesus is doing things that's not possible in the medical world.
That's right.
We have no cure for this, and yet he cured him. I wasn't sure. I didn't think we had a cure for the leprosy. But evidently, this guy's either God or he has so many tricks. You know, it's got to either be a collusion. So he paid an actor. He paid some guys to act like the guy was paralyzed. Because you know that's what some people are thinking. Like,
how many miracles would he have had to perform, Jase? How many would it have taken before somebody said, I tell you what, we think he's the way out of here. He's beaten death.
Unfortunately, because of people's hearts and pride, I think if he did a miracle every day since the beginning of time, some people would still say no.
That's right.
Because it's not
you
about
think about
that.
what did they do? What did they ultimately do to him in the face of all the miracles that he did perform? They didn't. At least the Pharisees didn't bend their knee to the one true God, the Messiah, who they've been waiting on. No, instead they killed him. And so I think that's the thing. If you just want the king, if you just want the kingdom without the king, then you're going to look at these miracles with disdain. You're going to look at the works of God with anger and resentment and hostility, and it's always going to be a barrier. But if you want the kingdom with the king, then you will see all of these things as beautiful. And I think that's why in all of these miracles, this constant thread that runs through them is these miracles are physical manifestations of a spiritual reality. And so that he's healing them of their physical ailments, but it's what he's making a point that this is a picture of what I'm going to do to you spiritually, and ultimately he will redeem us fully one day physically. But I mean, think about this guy with leprosy. Think about this man who couldn't walk. The man that he healed that couldn't walk, guess what he's not doing right now? He's not walking. So I mean, these healings that he was doing physically were temporary healings. What's more important is that you're healed spiritually, so that one day you can have a resurrected body that is imperishable. You know what Paul talked about in 1 Corinthians 15. That's the ultimate goal.
And don't underestimate, he didn't say, I'm going to forgive your sins. He said, friend, your sins are forgiven.
Yep.
Now, that may not have been what he wanted to hear, but if he would have grasped that, that'd have been the greatest thing that he could have ever heard.
Oh, yeah.
I know he was looking toward the cross, but when Jesus says your sins are forgiven, that's good enough.
But he based it on the faith of the four guys.
Well, when you think about it, I wish I had friends like that.
Me too.
I mean,
that's what I got from the story as much as anything else. If I had four friends like that could get me, and that's the whole point, right? Who can get us to the feet of Jesus? Because that's what friends are about.
No, that is I don't think that's an undercard point.
No.
I think we should all look for people, and I've said this many times. I have an inner circle of not just family members, but spiritual family, and their number one thing is they just have a profound love for Jesus. It's like it can't be hidden. And whether I have anything in common with them or not in the real world, I mean, one of my best friends I've mentioned many times is Trent Langhofer. I mean, we literally have nothing in common outside of Jesus. I guess we have spectacular wives, but we're really good friends because I pursued him because his love for Jesus was infectious.
Yep.
So to all the atheists, I would simply say, like the old movie there, so you're telling me there's a chance. You said, that's what we're telling you.
Dad just quoted Dumb and Dumber.
He did.
That's good. That's pretty impressive.
What do you think my chances are? 1 out of 1,000,000? He said, no, 1 out of 1,000. And she said, maybe 1 out of 1,000,000. He said, so you're telling me there's a chance. That's what we're telling the atheists today here.
And I didn't know you actually had seen that movie. But
that's a little shocking.
Every once in a while, you get about 75 or 80, and just things come and go pretty quick. Dude.
They dropped it in on his Gunsmoke channel, and he just didn't know what it was about. He kept waiting for Matt Dillon to come in.
I'm convinced of the resurrection of the dead after this little study today, more so than I ever have been in my life. I just don't know how we're going to get around it.
You can't get around
Somebody,
it.
I got a question. You got a better story?
Which is why we should do a movie from an investigation standpoint. We've never done that.
That's
but you
what
have
Zach-
Luke do the
you know what?
investigation.
There is a guy who wants to be on the podcast. I need to bring him on. He is an investigative. He was an investigator, like it was a cop, and he wrote a book called Cold Case. I think it's called Cold Case Christianity. So he did exactly. He went and looked at this. I'm going to examine this as if this was a cold case, and that's what he did for his career.
See, now there's
Isn't that what Luke is doing?
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna tell you. I'm gonna give you 24.
He just got you a writer, Jason.
I'm gonna give you 24 hours to make a move on it, and if you don't move, I'm gonna call Dallas Jenkins and say, "Look, after you're finished with The Chosen, look, we're gonna have the investigation."
But the cat's already out of the bags because you've given them the information where
That's
they
right.
say.
We'll be watching. We'll watch
Zach
this
off.
movie next year.
I don't care who does it. I just want it out there. I want no
Zach,
money,
make this dream a reality.
no credit. I had a dream and I was shared it, and I think it'd be a good movie.
Jace's dream.
Let's move on it.
All right, we're out of time. That's a perfect way to end. So, Jace, I dug into my old sermons, and I found one that I did call "The Hole in the Roof Gang." So, I'm going to talk a little bit about that in our overtime. So,
The hole in the
hole in the roof
Okay,
gang.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, so you saw.
It'd be a good title for another movie.
It would be. We're doing movies today. If you want to follow us over, blazetv.com/unashamed is where we do our overtime segment. See you there.
Thanks for listening to the Unashamed podcast. Help us out by rating us on iTunes. And don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube, and be sure to click that little bell to get notified about new episodes. And for even more content that you won't get anywhere else, subscribe to Blaze TV at blazetv.com/unashamed.